I'm not gonna bury the lead, ladies and gentlemen. This is a fucking shit comic.
West Coast Davengers. West Coast Davengers.
There's only one mantra that you all need to know. That's that one over there. See Todd, bye Todd.
Hey everybody, welcome back to a special episode of the West Coast Avengers. I'm your host Dave. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to all the new subscribers, all the old subscribers. If you're not subscribed, hit that button and hit the bell to be notified. I also have a podcast called Direct Edition. It's an extension of this, but it is mostly non-comics. It is a little bit of everything, but if you enjoy watching this video, you'll probably enjoy that podcast. So I wanted to make this video. I wasn't exactly sure on how to approach it. The 2-month anniversary of Ed Piskor's death was just a few days ago, and we're well into June, which means 2024 is half over. And I wanted to say off the bat that this video is not going to be full of sadness or anger or any of that. This is going to be a tribute to what Cartoonist Kayfabe laid down, and that's Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg, the tag team champions of the comic book world, as I like to call it. They laid down 5 years worth of amazing stuff on YouTube, and that's what I'm here to pay tribute to today and kind of go through some of my favorite episodes, some of the people that they introduced to us as a community and to me personally, and books that they brought into my life, whether their creations, which you can see are right in front of me, or books that I didn't have an interest in, didn't know anything about, or just needed to know that they existed. I'm still extremely upset about this. Cartoonist Kayfabe was a daily occurrence in my life. Typically, because I work from home, I'd get out of bed, I'd make coffee and breakfast, and I'd sit and I'd watch that morning's Kayfabe video. Because I'm in the West Coast, those videos would post at 6:30 in the morning, so by the time I roll out of bed around 7, I'm ready to go. And the funny thing about it is, because Jim and Ed aren't celebrities, they're very accessible. And you could literally comment about something on a YouTube video and one of them might reply, hit them up on Instagram, and this is before the Patreon. So it was a daily occurrence in my life, and I felt like this was two people that I was hanging out with at least once a day. It was very based in a niche hobby and a niche industry, so of course it felt like this is part of my life. A little bit about me and my discovery with Kayfabe, personal aside. During the pandemic, in the early stages of the pandemic, I lost my job and I quickly pivoted and became a mail carrier for the Postal Service in Seattle. And I was craving stuff to listen to while I walked for 10, 11 hours a day, 14 miles, and delivered the mail. And I started listening to Todd McFarlane interviews because he had just gotten the license for the DC figures. And my friend and partner in Davengers, Dave Korea, suggested I should listen to or check out Cartoonist Kayfabe because our mutual friend, Matt Ritchie, kind of, I think, was the one who originally suggested it. And so I listened to the McFarlane interview, and I never heard either Jim or Ed's voice. I did know who Ed was because of X-Men Grand Design, but I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know what he looked like, and I certainly didn't know how old he was, let alone I thought he might have been older, because when you look at this for the first time, you think maybe an older guy drew it. No, he was a little bit younger than me. Me and Jim were closer in the same age. But I'd listened to the McFarlane interview, and I think maybe within a day, I decided, not being a huge YouTube viewer, I decided, hey, let me check out some of the stuff on YouTube, and it was like that. I got sucked into video after video, and shortly thereafter began my mornings with Kayfabe. I was able to catch a shorter episode on a work day because I had to be at work for the mail, etc. But if I didn't finish the video in the morning, I'd watch it when I got home. And Kayfabe is the main piece of inspiration that I needed to start this YouTube channel. Shortly after I started my YouTube channel, I quit my job and went into full-time selling comics, but I was always inspired by everything that they put down in their program. From the way that they spoke about comics, which is some of the vernacular is artist speak, which I don't have because I'm not an artist. So it took me a little while to understand what things like zipatone was and foreshortening and all of these things. But you watch enough of it, you start to pick up the techniques that they're talking about, even if I am not a comic creator, which I'm not. But I am the other side of it. And both Jim and Ed were super passionate on the show, whether it was in artist speak or it was in, consuming this stuff as a reader or remembering the nostalgia and the negative nostalgia of collecting comics in the 90s, which the first thing that I binged with them at that point was the Wizard coverage. And that's pretty much everybody's entry point into the channel back in 2019, 2020, early pandemic days, is Jim and Ed went through Wizard magazine from issue 1 all the way up to, I think maybe the last issue that they did was in the high 70s.
Even a Batman Returns movie review. This is a who's in it. A couple of issues ago we had the review of a screenplay that wasn't used, and now we're going back through and just looking at who's in it and who's not in it. He's constantly referencing newspapers. What are all these newspapers that are writing about this? It's ludicrous. These articles, they're so strange.
What a trip it was. But what they did, that, and Ed has talked about the inspiration for that was, I forget the name of the channel, but there was a gaming channel that went through, I guess, old Game Pros and EGM magazines from the 90s. And what it was it wasn't just looking at the magazine and commenting on it. Jim and Ed would slap down a comic that was talked about in the book and talk about that, and it became this kind of branching exercise of like, let's see how many tangents we can go off, still reel it back in, and keep going and reel it back in.
Character is going to be worth a little something. So of course your homeboy Ed has several copies of New Mutants 98. Some schmuck ganked one of them, my original copy, which
No way.
upsets me. The second appearance of Deadpool in X-Force number 2 is worth some value. This is my original copy that I picked up on the stands in September
Looks like you
1991.
enjoyed that one.
I enjoyed it a lot, and I have a treat for you and the Kayfabers at home, because this comic and this story was so important to me. I read and reread for years. So in 1994, here's a little Eddie P. Deadpool.
Sweet.
But Rob Liefeld inspired me to create my own characters, right? So there's this character called Swift Spear.
I don't know for sure because I never asked this to Ed or Jim, but I imagine that branching off is what led to them wanting to look at books specifically instead of just Wizard magazine. And if you go back and watch the first 6 months of the channel as they talk about their growth and they try new episodes, there's so much going on in there and there's so much knowledge being shared. And entering very early was Tom Scioli, and Tom is like the third Kayfaber. His knowledge on certain things in the early part of the channel of Atomo and Dark Knight it's insight that is so invaluable. Specifically, if you watched, I believe it's the third episode of their breakdown of The Dark Knight Returns, where Tom talks about the psychosis of Batman's sex life. It's insane, it's unhinged, but it's really well thought out. So that's kind of the beginning of it for me. And like I said, I became, very religious in the way that I watched it. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in the Church of Kayfabe. And so I wanted to talk about some of my favorite episodes today and just basically ask you, my Davenger viewer, and maybe some new people that are watching this, if you're not subscribed to Kayfabe, Ed had this kind of goal, this dream, to hit 100,000 subscribers. They're about 6,000 away. I have 4,000 subscribers. If y'all could just go over to Kayfabe and hit that subscribe button. If you're a comics fan, if you've ever opened up a comic book to read it, or look at the art, there's an episode for you. Unless you are literally just a window shopper of CGC books, there is a video for you. because there are a couple of CGC snuff films in there. So, what are you going to do, right? But Warren Bernard brought some slabs and they would crack them out. Anyway, I digress. I started watching religiously, and I'm better off for it. I learned so much about comics, so much about art process, so much about artists and writers, and the way that specifically Jim and Ed thought about certain things and the way that they formed their opinions. They helped me hone in some of my opinions and the way I speak about books, even if I don't like them, and be vocal about great comics, maybe not so vocal about really bad comics unless it's, something laughably bad, like my favorite episode of all time, the All-Star Batman episode, which is the book that Jim Lee and Frank Miller did in the 2000s. Now, Jim Rugg is a very calm and collected person. He gets very excited about the things he likes. But when you watch this video, you finally get to see him lose his cool because that comic book was absolutely terrible. That entire series was terrible.
What is this? Like,
so
what
weird.
are you writing?
It's so weird.
If I ever liked Batman, and I can't hardly remember that time, I'm not sure I ever really did, wouldn't you hate him after this? And if you don't, this is your hero. He's kidnapping a 12-year-old who's suffering from certainly PTSD after watching his parents' heads get blown off in front of him. What is this comic about?
And Jim kind of points out, why. And I thought, when I read that book as it came out, because I was super excited for it, it was on the heels of the Sin City movie coming out. Jim Lee is arguably putting in some of his best art at DC. This All-Star Batman and Robin comes out, and it's a travesty. It's so bad, you probably should read it. But that would probably be my favorite episode of all time because I enjoy laughing, and that is a very funny episode. Some of the other ones, the first 10 Wizard episodes are kind of untouchable, but all of the Wizard episodes are great. And the cool thing is about the Kayfabe channel, yes, they have over 2,000 videos, but they have playlists that you can kind of just go through. You can search in the search bar that's on the channel. So I'll have tons of links down below, and you'll be able to just kind of go through it and see what you want to watch. One of the other things that we loved Kayfabe for was not just their unflinching honesty, but the fact that it was, I joked around with Jim Rugg, and he's been on the channel twice, so those interviews will be linked down below too. I always joked with him that he's good cop and Ed is bad cop, but, kayfabe is a wrestling term, and it means to kind of keep the gimmick alive. Like, you always kind of live your gimmick, and to break kayfabe is to, kind of be out of character. But you have to understand that they grew into themselves as characters too once they realized that people were here for a show as well. And you can see that Ed's character is a little bit of the heel, just a little bit. But he's also, he goes face, he's a baby face sometimes too. Jim, mostly baby face, sometimes goes heel. Tom kind of falls into a wild card category. Like maybe he's Mankind, or he's Dude Love, or he's Cactus Jack. Bang, 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 bang. There are so many episodes that are worth watching, but a couple other ones of my favorite episodes are Show and Tell 7, which is very early on in the channel. They do have a Show and Tell playlist, but you can view the videos from oldest to newest and just scroll down to Show and Tell 7, which is bootleg comics. And it's all about Ed and Jim showing off their favorite bootleg comics, stuff, and it's kind of like a crash course in making your own comics. Kayfabe has it's kind of a triple-edged sword of a slogan. Originally, the slogan gets said as read more comics, and then when they do like a make your own comics thing or a process video, they change it to make more comics. And because they were both highly influenced by manga, and Ed obviously his well-documented Japan trips, read more manga is also one of the pieces of that slogan. They did a series of Otomo videos early on in the channel, which they've done tons of Otomo videos since then. But the beginning, it was going through Domu and then Akira, and there's so much brilliant insight into that.
Heel turn in the truest sense. And heel turns are so much fun. And this is really fun. It's like his best friend, and then he disappears for a while, and it's like, oh, they have a new leader. The clown gang has a new leader, and he's real tough. And I think it's Tetsuo, and then you see him, and he's like this. It's like just like you're having so like those sequences in the book are so much fun.
And he's just eating drugs.
Yeah.
Like the whole clown gang now is in the business of getting him drugs that he's just consuming. It's the perfect, again, young adult rebel gang villain. Man, he hams it up.
If you are an Atomo fan at all, you need to check out their videos. They have an Atomo playlist too, which has like 30 something videos on it, but that spans the entire history of the channel too. The aforementioned Dark Knight Returns series, they went through each of the 4 books on separate episodes. I think the whole thing is about 3.5 hours total. Brilliant insight. I'm actually rewatching it right now. I have to hit the 4th episode, and then I'm going to reread Dark Knight Returns for the first time in, I don't know, 10 years or so. And I mean, honestly, the biggest influence overall is just, I look at kayfabe as the gasoline of the fire that's still burning in me right now. Not just to create more content and explore more comics, but to read things again and look at them through a different lens and enjoy them in a different way or critique them in a different way. This is an art form that has been around since the early 1900s. I mean, I know there's stuff a little bit earlier than that, but it's still evolving and it's still kind of new. It's the same thing with film. I mean, film is still kind of new and evolving. Some of the things have evolved into shit, but some of them have got, some of the evolutions of film have been amazing. Look at the 70s and the 80s. You basically have like the greatest turn of cinema happens in the 70s and the early 80s. And that's just my opinion. That was the thing. This channel just kind of turned me around and made me a comics fan in a different way that I hadn't been. And personal aside, I actually worked in the comics industry in early 2019 and got burned pretty fucking bad. And I had stepped away from comics for almost all of 2019 until I found kayfabe and started chatting with friends like Dave and Matt about comics. There's so much more to kayfabe than just that, but I can only talk about my personal experience. Now, some other episodes that I absolutely love, if you really want to laugh, they recently did the Heroes Reborn series. So it was when Marvel brought back Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Will Sportasio to relaunch Marvel. And there was Iron Man 1, Captain America 1, Avengers 1, and Fantastic Four 1. You should watch all 4 of those episodes. Those books are not that good, so those episodes reflect that. But my favorite one is the Iron Man 1 episode. Ed did not pull punches. And that's another thing I loved about him. He was honest. And Jim is honest. When you're honest, it just feels right. Like, you can critique something, but when you're doing it from a place of love and honesty, this channel was about the love of comics. Even when they didn't like something, it was still about the love of the medium. And both Jim and Ed are and were passionate about trying to push that medium and push people to be better, because they push themselves to be better. I mean, if you look at, Jim's Street Angel book is such a fantastic book, and it just gets better and better. Ed is the Jack Kirby of the Grand Design universe. He pushed Marvel to do more of them, and Fantastic Four Grand Design by Tom and Hulk Grand Design by Jim are examples of that. And if you look at WYSIWYG to Hip Hop Family Tree, it's like, this is great, but this is on a different level. And then there's Red Room, and I know Red Room's not everybody's thing, and there are pieces of it I love and pieces of it I don't love, but that's okay. Like, I enjoyed the experience that it gave me and the craft that it took to make that. So going back into some of my other favorite episodes, they would sometimes do read-throughs of Comics Journal articles. And it's fascinating because you would think, right, like at the kind of the basis of it, 2 dudes reading an article, how could that be interesting? But it was the input, it was the opinions, it was the delivery, it was the way they talked about it. Earliest of those videos is one near and dear to my heart, which is the Todd McFarlane, Gary Groth interview from Comics Journal.
From this conversation is like they're 2 fucking big willies like duking it out, and they both come out.
He says at one point, a lot of guys think you're a fuck. DeGroff, and then he adds, "You don't have to print that." It's almost taunting him, right? Like, of course he has to print that. You're challenging his journalistic integrity by saying you don't have to print that.
he's like, I hate to tell you, bud, but a lot of people think you're a fuck.
They go through the whole magazine, so it's not just focused on that. But goddamn, that's 5 hours of content that is absolutely captivating and tons of laughs and great insight. And then fast forward to more recently, and I'm very proud of this. I had hit up Ed. I was reading a comics journal that I was like, "Do you know about this?" And it's and I'll flash the cover on the screen. It's an interview with Rob Liefeld done by Hart D. Fisher, and Hart Fisher wrote those kind of like takedown parody books called Kill Image and Kill Marvel. And it's a very unflinching, honest interview from Liefeld. I want to say it's in the, I forget it, but I want to say it's in the late 90s. And so Ed was like, "I've never seen that before. I didn't know it existed." I ended up getting another copy of it, and I'm like, "I'm going to send it your way to you guys. Hopefully, you cover it." Not only did they cover it, they covered it over 2 episodes, which were fantastic. And I did not ask Ed at all to do this. I did not expect it. But in those episodes, Ed not only gave me a full shout out, but he talked about the channel. I believe he linked the channel in the description. I didn't know any of that was going to happen. I was extremely honored and a little bit shyly embarrassed about it, just because I didn't know that was going to happen. And, it was really sweet of him. And I never expected that. But that is a great episode. I'm not just saying that because of my involvement. Like, if you watch that episode, you'll understand. Well, those 2 episodes, you'll understand why. If I was going to be boastful, I would talk about the Swamp Thing, Richard Corbin episodes that I made happen. Those are great episodes too. But. The Marvel Comics Presents Wolverine Weapon X series that they did was great. It has one of the greatest, Jim Rugg loses his cool moments.
This is the story he wanted to make, obviously. See, this is the cover to the trade that I had.
How much better is this cover than this cover?
I know, right?
This is just awful. Whoever's responsible for this cover, shame on you.
Yeah.
You had 100+ pages of Barry Windsor Smith art to pull beautiful images from, and this is what you came up with. We talked about how great many of these covers are, and this is what you came up with. And we praised the logo, and this is what you chose as a logo, the most generic font. Shame on whoever built this cover. Shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on everybody that approved it. Shame. You're in a visual medium, and that's what you came up with.
And then they also did artist edition of that too. Those are some of the greatest, because if you read, collected, bought comics in the 90s, Weapon X is a huge thing. Barry Windsor Smith is a god. So you should check those out. One of the other things that is a huge inspiration to me that is laid down by Ed and Jim on this channel is the shoot interviews. Shoot interview was a wrestling term where they would kind of put a wrestler in front of a curtain. You would not see the interviewees, and there would be questions asked, and it was an out of character, let's talk about the wrestling business, behind the scenes kind of unflinching interviews. They took that concept, they started with that concept, but then when COVID hit, you couldn't be in the same room as people, all that stuff, so they would do Skype interviews. And those became a staple on the channel. And it was almost like the kayfabe community would wonder, who are they going to do next? Oh, can you guys get this, that, and this person and that person? The pinnacle of those interviews, by far, hands down, is this series that they did with Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, who are the creators of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and people responsible for maybe the entirety of indie comics that came after it. The way the industry and the indie stuff kind of shifted too. But they've done a series of interviews with them where they reunited them, and they flipped through, I think it's the first 8 or 7 Turtles issues. Those interviews are history. They're not just comics history. They're history. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I would equate to being maybe the comic equivalent of what Star Wars was to movies. It changed everything, and it is part of the zeitgeist going forward in the last 40 years. They do all these interviews with Peter and Kevin, and they're sweet. They're full of great stories. You really get to see this friendship rekindled with Peter and Kevin. It's so sweet. I don't want to talk about it too much because I will get choked up. They even, they bring in David Cho to do a couple of the episodes, and I know a lot of people have opinions about Cho, but from a comics fandom point of view, it was great to see him ask some great questions for the two of them. Those are the pinnacle of the shoot interviews, bar none. But some of the other favorites that they've done, Dave Gibbons, and then they did a Watchmen read-through with him, Brian Bolland, and then a separate one where they do a read-through of Killing Joke, Eric Larson and Savage Dragon. They do a separate shoot interview, and then they do a flip-through. Rob Liefeld's been on there a couple times, and say what you want about Rob, but his enthusiasm for the medium and his knowledge of the history is unparalleled. So shout outs to Uncle Rob. And I would also like to say, if you have not heard Rob's podcast, which is called Robservations, he did an episode shortly after Ed died, and it was a tribute. It's extremely emotional, but it is a must listen to if you want to hear somebody really say some sweet, amazing things about Ed and, share some great stories. Another great artist, legend, who became a staple on the channel, Jeff Darrow. So there's a playlist with a bunch of Jeff Darrow videos. They flip through all of his books, but he's been on countless shoot interviews and episodes with them. So the Gibbons, Bolland, Darrow, Liefeld, and Eastman and Laird. But there's so many. If you're not a fan of any of those people, there's 2 Todd shoot interviews. If you're not a fan of Todd, there's Seth. There's Daniel Clowes. I believe they interviewed Gilbert Hernandez. I can't remember if they interviewed Jaime. Anyway, there's a shooter interview playlist. You can find it on Kayfabe's page. What I'm trying to say here and what I'm trying to lay down with this is that I miss Ed. I miss his voice. His work will speak for itself. But this channel is not just him. It is him and Jim putting down so much stuff. And we are all better for it as comics fans, comics makers, readers, retailers. You can find some slice of your interests on these videos. All you have to do is subscribe and dig around on there. They evolved and they kept trying to change things up. And it was about a year and change ago, maybe like late 2022, early 2023, they introduced the Kayfabe Patreon. And what they basically offered was you get the videos early, you get a little more insight, maybe some bonus videos. But then the King Kayfaber level, which was the paid level, and I believe it was $10 a month, you get to watch on Thursdays as they recorded all of the videos in one sitting. And it became a club. It became the hangout. I joined immediately, and within a couple weeks, the chat kind of started to know each other a bit. It wasn't just people in the comments, and it wasn't just people on the Instagram. We were chatting real time as they were recording, and in between record sessions, Ed and Jim, they'd look at the comments, or they'd just have a conversation and we'd be part of it. And it became this just Thursday ritual. For me, I did my live sales on Wednesday, so I do Thursday morning. I'll bill all my customers out for the stuff that they bought, and I'll sit and watch these guys record for 6 hours, 5 hours at a pop, and just kind of hang out with my friends in the chat. And, big shouts to all the King Kayfabers. I'm not going to list you all, but you know who you are. And a lot of you have been on this channel or subscribers of this channel have been live drawing on Davengers Con and all that kind of stuff. So it became this extension of a community that I always wanted to be in. I always wanted a bunch of people to talk about comics about. I have friends that, I can talk music, movies, life, anything about, but I don't have a ton of close friends that are big comics fans. And when I say big comics fans, people like the King Kayfabers. And so it was really nice to have that. And it would share some more insight also into their process. And I, as a YouTuber and a podcaster, I was interested in seeing how they did everything, because I'm like, oh, how do you guys, I would watch and be like, oh, top down, they stand up for the artist editions, they move the camera around, they have a monitor, this, that, and the other thing. And I looked up to them in that aspect, although I realized at some point, I was like, oh, I should tell them about StreamYard. And a bunch of people told them about StreamYard. And it's like they changed the way that they recorded certain live interviews and stuff. But it was awesome to see this behind the scenes thing and also have it be this community. So the Patreon became this ritual, and we get to call each other kings, and they would refer to us as kings. So that, it also feels good. And so the podcast would introduce people kind of like homies or people that they wanted to bring onto the channel that weren't necessarily, some were comics makers, some weren't. And we got to know them too through the process of that. Obviously, Tom is number one because he was kind of the third host of the show. But Warren Bernard, he's kind of a comics historian and also has one of the, craziest collection of like pre-war strips and all that kind of older golden age stuff. Warren was on the channel a lot, and whenever they had Warren on the channel, he would produce some of the best episodes and some of the coolest stuff. Warren Bernard's one of the people that I think of when I think of the channel and people that they introduced. Comics makers like Michel Fife and Jim Mafood, they were on the channel a bunch, so I got to kind of know who they were a bit better than I did from just reading their comics. And then with Ed's Japan trips, Ed would talk about his crew, and then he started bringing some of those people on the channel, like Brian Moss, like Scheme Richards, like Aki and Danny Bedrosian, and more recently, somebody that's come into the fold in my life and I've become friends with. Y'all know him as Japan Book Hunter, Sean, Koenji Sean. He was somebody that Ed kind of introduced us to. And when I mean us, the entire kayfabe community. And Sean basically does what I do. He hunts books, except it's manga and it's in Japan. And so it's even more of a unique thing because nobody else really does what he does. And so I had Sean on the channel, and I got this message from Ed that said, I watched your interview with Sean. It was great, great work. And I didn't expect that, and it was really nice to hear that. But Sean is somebody who I am so thankful for kayfabe for bringing him into the fold. And in my talks with Jim on the channel, we talked about manga a little bit, and I told him, I was like, that's my goal for 2024 is to read more manga, and he thought that was pretty great. And here we are in 2024, and I do read more manga now. Every person, character, whatever that they brought into the fold on their channel is somebody that I'm like, oh, I'm glad that I know who this person is now. All this is just to say how influential kayfabe was in my life. It's very rare that something like this comes along and has such an impact across the board. And there are musicians out there that watch the show. There's, people in Hollywood. There's all sorts of people that are interested in art and comics that found this channel at a time where we didn't have much hope in the world. There was so much uncertainty. And the one thing that we could all enjoy was a world in pages. Some cover to cover, something that gets us lost, something that brings us to a place where we can escape reality and just shut off the real world for a moment. And Jim and Ed really did a great job of giving us a place to be and a community, even if they didn't understand how big it was going to be and how many people it was going to truly affect. And that's really the power of what they laid down. And that's really what I'm trying to convey here is it's not about the tragedy and it's not about where we go from here. It's about paying tribute and still keeping this in our lives, because as long as YouTube exists, and I'm going to guess the world will probably end with YouTube still existing. As long as YouTube still exists, we have this resource, we have this comfort, we have this insight. And what they did is worth so much more than any words I could say. I want you, if you don't know this channel, to subscribe and check it out. I swear to you, you will get lost in the best way possible. Couple of things that I want to wrap up with. Ed's sister, Justine, started an Instagram page called Ed Piskor Legacy. I will put that link down below. She wants to keep her brother's memory alive and show off a lot of the work that maybe we didn't see, and show photos and stuff. There's the KFAM Sunday page started by Brian Moss. Coming in August, I believe it's August 24th, there's going to be the Eddie P Comic-Con in Pennsylvania. You could find that also on the Ed Piskor Legacy page. I will most likely be there as an attendee. There will be a lot of friends there as attendees and also exhibiting, but if you can, and you're somewhere in the Pennsylvania or Eastern Seaboard, please get a ticket and go to the Comic-Con. It's just going to be a one-day thing, but I think with the support that we can give it, it'll grow into something bigger. And it's funny because Ed and Jim always kind of talked about starting a Comic-Con when the channel gets big enough. Well, no better time than the present, right? Other than that, for my part, I'm going to keep the legacy alive in my own way. When I do a top-down video and I go through a book, or when my buddy Read Your Comics, Daryl, has me on his channel and we go through a book, I'll just mention kayfabe. And, you know, it's always in tribute to the masters, the people that paved the road so that I could drive on it. And what I love about comics will always be on this channel. Not every video is going to be about the inside of a comic. It's going to be about whatever I feel like or whatever collection I bought that week. Rest assured, kayfabe will live on through me as much as I can pay tribute to it. Thank you again for indulging me on this episode. I know it's not the most exciting one, but it also is something that I wanted to talk about. And like I said, I got to keep Cartoonist Kayfabe's legacy going any way I can. So, a couple of things. You can find all the links to the stuff down below that I talked about. You can still buy merch from the Cartoonist Kayfabe merch shop. You can still subscribe to Cartoonist Kayfabe and watch thousands of hours of videos.
Give them those marching orders and we'll be on our way.
Read more comics.
Dave out.
Somebody in the comments, West Coast Dave, I think, is like, I like stunt casting. It creates more readers. Well, what if these comics were good? Then maybe you would really create readers and not just get people to buy the sizzle and not the steak, you know?